Hi, everybody, and welcome to chapters 2 and 3 of the City of Ember. You should be able to find the PDF file or the Google Doc file of chapters 2 and 3 in Google Classroom right now. As we read along today, you'll notice that we've included the maps at the beginning of this file as well, in part because in our reading today of chapter 3, Dune is going to reference this map. So he's going to talk a little bit about this. Additionally, you may just for your own interest want to take a look as we read further into the book about the different locations and where it is that they're spending their days. So when you hear them reference certain places, you may just want to check it out on the map. It's a little bit of fun that you can look back on. So as you will recall, the last time we read, the characters in the book were given their jobs for assignment day. And Lina and Dune weren't particularly happy with the assignments they were given, so they switched. So chapter 2 takes us into Lina's mind as she goes into an adventure of having her first day as a messenger. And then in chapter 3, we'll get inside the mind of Dune Harrow and see how his first day in Pipeworks went. Chapter 2. A message to the mayor. Lina often took different routes between school and home. Sometimes just for variety, she'd go all the way around Spark Swallow Square or way up by the shoe repair shops on Livery Street. But today, she took the shortest route because she was eager to get home and tell her news. She ran fast and easily through the streets of Ember. Every corner, every alley, every building was familiar to her. She always knew where she was, though most streets looked more or less the same. All of them were lined with two-story stone buildings, the wood of their window frames and doors long unpainted. On the street level were shops. Above the shops were the apartments where people lived. Every building at the place where the wall met the roof was equipped with a row of floodlights, big cone-shaped lamps that cast a strong yellow glare. Stone walls, lighted windows, lumpy, muffled shapes of people. Lina flew by them. Her slender legs felt immensely strong, like the wood of a bow that flexes and springs. She darted around obstacles, broken furniture left for the trash heaps or for scavengers, stoves and refrigerators that were past repair, peddlers sitting on the pavement with their wares spread out around them. She leapt over cracks and potholes. So as we enter this chapter, we're actually getting Lina's reaction right after assignment day, right after she changed jobs with Dune. So we see that we have a nice little simile right here that describes how much energy she has, how strong she felt as she was running through the streets. She is legitimately overjoyed with the situation that she's found herself in. And if you can remember how disappointed she was to be assigned Pipeworks, you can see this is quite the contrast. Lina's definitely on a high right now. When she came to Hafter Street, she slowed a little. This street was deep in shadow. 4 of its street lamps were out and had not been fixed. For a second, Lina thought of the rumors she had heard about light bulbs, that some kinds were completely gone. She was used to shortages of things, everyone was, but not of light bulbs. If the bulbs for the street lamps ran out, the only lights would be inside the buildings. What would happen then? How could people find their way through the streets in the dark? So this is a really kind of troubling question that Lina has on her mind in the middle of all this joy, which shows us that Lina has the maturity to kind of ponder those big adult type questions. It's just, not something that she enjoys thinking too much about. Somewhere inside her, a black worm of dread stirred. Ooh, that's a nice metaphor right there, right? We have a black worm of dread. Okay? And dread is a great vocabulary word. If it's one that you don't know, use it for the vocabulary slides. It's a powerful word. It just means a feeling of utter misery. She thought about Dune's outburst in class. Could things really be as bad as he said? She didn't want to believe it. She pushed the thought away. So here it is. Lina's making a choice to ignore those bigger questions. As she turned onto Boldlow Street, she sped up again. She passed a line of customers waiting to get into the vegetable market, their shopping bags draped over their arms. At the corner of Oliver Street, she dodged a group of washers trudging along with bags of laundry, and some movers carrying a broken table. She passed a street sweeper shoving dust around with his broom. I am so lucky, she thought, to have the job I want, and because of Dune Harrow, of all people. When they were younger, Lina and Dune had been friends. Together they explored the back alleys and dimly lit edges of the city, but in their 4th year of school they had begun to grow apart. It started one day during the hour of free time, when the children in their class were playing on the front steps of the school. I can go down 3 steps at a time, someone would boast. I can hop down on 1 foot, someone else would say. The others would chime in. I can do a handstand against the pillar. I can leapfrog over the trash can. As soon as one child did something, all the rest would do it, too, to prove that they could. Lina could do it all, even when the dares got wilder. She yelled out the wildest one of all, I can climb the light pole. For a second, everyone just stared at her. But Lina dashed across the street, took off her shoes and socks, and wrapped herself around the cold metal of the pole. Pushing it with her bare feet, she inched upward. She didn't get very far before she lost her grip and fell back down. The children laughed, and so did she. I didn't say I could climb to the top, she explained. I just said I'd climb it. The others swarmed forward to try. Lizzie wouldn't take off her socks. Her feet were too cold, she said. So she kept sliding back. 40 Penn wasn't strong enough to get more than a foot off the ground. Next came Dune. He took his shoes and socks off and placed them neatly at the top of the pole. At the foot of the pole. Then he announced in his serious way, I am going to the top. He clasped the pole and started upward, pushing with his feet, his knees sticking out to the sides. He pulled himself upward, pushed again. He was higher now than Lina had been. But suddenly, his hands slid, and he came plummeting down. He landed on his bottom with his legs poking up in the air. Lina laughed. She shouldn't have. He might have been hurt, but he looked so funny that she couldn't help it. He wasn't hurt. He could have jumped up, grinned, and walked away, but Dune did not take things lightly. When he heard Lina and the others laughing, his face darkened. His temper rose in him like hot water. So there's a simile. Don't you dare laugh at me, he said to Lina. I did better than you did. That was a stupid idea anyway, a stupid, stupid idea to climb that pole. And as he was shouting, red in the face, their teacher, Mrs. Pollster, came out onto the steps and saw him. She took him by the shirt collar to the school's director's office, where he got a scolding he didn't think he deserved. So, if we open up our character charts, what we should add at this point is that, well, we've got a couple of things that are kind of significant. Let's go to Lina first, okay? Lina definitely is excited about being a messenger, so if you don't have that down, you should add it. But I also think it's worth adding that she chooses to ignore the issues in Ember. Okay? She seems to really not want to think too hard about situations that she feels are beyond her control. Now, for Dune, also, worth adding that he's a very serious person, right? So in his serious way, we see right here, he announces, even in 4th grade, as a younger person, I'm going to the top of the pole. He's very serious. And he doesn't take things lightly. We see that in the story that Lina just described for us, that he really does, when he says he's going to do something, he's a man of his word. He takes his word seriously. even if it's something as frivolous as a dare in school. So what we need to add to Dune is that seriousness and that he doesn't take things lightly, because those two personality traits are really going to come in to full force when we get to his chapter. After that day, Lina and Dune barely looked at each other when they passed in the hallway. At first, it was because they were fuming about what had happened. Dune didn't like being laughed at. Lina didn't like being shouted at. After a while, the memory of the light pole incident faded. But by then, they had gotten out of the habit of friendship. By the time they were 12, they knew each other only as classmates. Lina was friends with Viddy Chance, Orly Gordon, and most of all, red-haired Lizzie Biscoe, who could run almost as fast as Lina and could talk 3 times faster. Now, as Lina sped toward home, she felt immensely grateful to Dune and hoped he'd come to no harm in the pipeworks. Maybe they'd be friends again. She'd like to ask him about the pipeworks. She was curious about it. When she got to Greystone Street, she passed Clary Lane, who was probably on her way to the greenhouses. Clary waved to her and called out, "What job?" And Lina called back, "Messenger," and ran on. Lina lived in Quillam Square, over the yarn shop run by her grandmother. When she got to the shop, she burst in the door and cried, "Granny, I'm a messenger!" Granny's shop had once been a tidy place, where each ball of yarn and spool of thread had its spot in the cubby holes that lined the walls. All the yarn and thread came from old clothes that had gotten too shabby to be worn. Granny unraveled sweaters and picked apart dresses and jackets and pants. She wound the yarn into balls and the thread into spools, and people bought them to use in making new clothes. These days, the shop was a mess. Long loops and strands of yarn dangled out of the cubby holes, and the browns and grays and purples were mixed in with the ochres and olive greens and dark blues. Granny's customers often had to spend half an hour unsnarling the rust-red yarn from the muddy brown, or trying to fish out the end of a thread from a tangled wad. Granny wasn't much help. Most days she just dozed behind the counter in her rocking chair. So this is kind of an interesting situation. As we're aware, Lina is 12 years old. So our hope and our belief was that somebody at home was taking care of things. But based on this description, Granny just seems to be getting old. And unfortunately, as people age, their abilities sometimes get diminished. And they have a tougher time with things. And it seems like Granny doesn't really have much of a grasp on the shop that she runs. Just as a reader, I don't know about you, but I wonder who gets the shop next? Do they wait until Papi's older? Papi is Lina's little sister, and she's only about 3 years old. Because if Granny isn't really running the shop well or effectively, and people aren't being serviced effectively, remember what the mayor said, every job in Ember was important, and every job had to be done to the best of your ability. Granny's not really doing this job well. So it does just make me question that. Does this become a job that gets thrown into the bag for, the next grade of 8th graders to choose? Or do they wait for somebody in the family to get old enough to run it? Or in 3 years, if Lina's not a great messenger, do they give her the job of running the shop? It kind of leaves you with a lot of questions of how the society is run. That's where she was when Lina burst in with her news. Lina saw that Granny had forgotten to knot up her hair in the morning. It was standing out from her head in a wild white frizz. Granny stood up looking puzzled. "You aren't a messenger, dear. You're a schoolgirl," she said. "But Granny, today was assignment day. I got my job and I'm a messenger." Granny's eyes lit up and she slapped her hand down on the counter. "I remember," she cried. "Messenger. That's a grand job. You'll be good at it." Lina's little sister toddled out from behind the counter on unsteady legs. She had a round face and round brown eyes. At the top of her head was a sprig of brown hair tied up with a scrap of red yarn. She grabbed onto Lina's knees. Weena, she said. Lina bent over and took the child's hands. Papi, your big sister's got a job. Are you happy, Papi? Are you proud of me? Papi said something that sounded like, happy, happy, hop. Lina laughed, hoisted her up, and danced with her around the shop. Lina loved her little sister so much that it was like an ache under her ribs. So love that feels so powerful that you actually physically can feel it. That's an interesting simile. The baby and Granny were all the family she had now. 2 years ago, when the coughing sickness was raging through the city again, her father had died. Some months later, her mother, giving birth to Papi, had died, too. Lina missed her parents with an ache that was as strong as what she felt for Papi, only it was a hollow feeling instead of a full one. So that idea of missing someone being a hollow feeling is just an interesting description. But it also shows us that Lina still struggles with the feeling of loss. You do the math. 2 years ago, she was 10 years old when her father passed away, and shortly thereafter, she lost her mom as well. And Papi, unfortunately, will never have known either of her parents. Really, Lina is the only parent that Papi has, along with Granny. And as we just read, Granny is not really doing that well. When do you start? Asked Granny. Tomorrow, said Lina. I report to the messenger station at 8 o'clock. You'll be a famous messenger, said Granny. Fast and famous. Taking Papi with her, Lina went out of the shop and climbed the stairs to their apartment. It was a small apartment, only 4 rooms, but there was enough stuff in it to fill 20. There were things that had belonged to Lina's parents, her grandparents, even their grandparents, old, broken, cracked, threadbare things that had been patched and repaired dozens or hundreds of times. People in Ember rarely threw anything away. They made the best possible use of what they had. So I just want you to imagine, I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show Hoarders, but if you have, you kind of get the idea of what it looks like when you fit, 20 rooms of stuff in a 4-room house or apartment in this case. It's kind of chaotic, right? So the idea that people in Ember never threw anything away, though, as a reader, kind of gives me hope that perhaps the instructions will be found. Because remember from the introductory paragraph, the instructions, right? They were kind of lost in someone's house. But if nothing's ever thrown away, then maybe, just maybe, we have a hope that the instructions will turn up somewhere. In Lina's apartment, layers of worn rugs and carpets covered the floor, making it soft but uneven underfoot. Against one wall squatted a sagging couch with round wooden balls for legs, and on the couch were blankets and pillows, so many that you had to toss some on the floor before you could sit down. Against the opposite wall stood 2 wobbly tables that held a clutter of plates and bottles, cups and bowls, unmatching forks and spoons, little piles of scrap paper, bits of string wound in untidy wads, and a few stubby pencils. There were 4 lamps, 2 tall ones that stood on the floor and 2 short ones that stood on tables. And in uneven lines up near the ceiling were hooks that held coats and shawls and nightgowns and sweaters, shelves that held pots and pans and jars with unreadable labels, and boxes of buttons and pins and tacks. So a lot of interesting details here to visualize when we're picturing this apartment. Where there were no shelves, the walls had been decorated with things of beauty. A label from a can of peaches, a few dried yellow squash flowers, a strip of faded but still pretty purple cloth. There were drawings, too. Lina had done the drawings out of her imagination. They showed a city that looked somewhat like Ember, except that its buildings were lighter and taller and had more windows. One of the drawings had fallen to the floor. Lina retrieved it and pinned it back up. She stood for a minute and looked at the pictures. Over and over, she'd drawn the same city. Sometimes she drew it as seen from afar. Sometimes she chose one of its buildings and drew it in detail. She put it in stairways and street lamps and carts. Sometimes she tried to draw the people who lived in the city, though she wasn't good at drawing people. Their heads always came out too small, and their hands looked like spiders. One picture showed a scene in which the people of the city greeted her when she arrived, the first person they had ever seen to come from elsewhere. They argued with each other about who would be the first to invite her home. Lina could see this city so clearly in her mind, she almost believed it was real. She knew it couldn't be, though. The book of the City of Ember, which all children studied in school, taught otherwise. The City of Ember was made for us long ago by the builders, the book said. It is the only light in the dark world. Beyond Ember, the darkness goes on forever in all directions. Now, as a reader, this temptation is to view this as a metaphor and a hyperbole, because you guys are skilled readers, right? We know that nothing can really go on forever, right? We know that comparing a city to a light is a metaphor. But for Lina, she's taking this really literally. She's saying that she and her classmates have been taught that their city is the only city in the entire world. And that she legitimately believes that the darkness, if you go out of the boundaries of Ember, will go on forever. You will never find anything but darkness. So it's kind of interesting because it does make you wonder how much impact and influence what we are taught in school has on us. Because, Lina is believing that this is reality. This is what she's been taught. Which is why it's always kind of interesting to question what it is that you've been taught, because knowledge changes. As we as a human species learn more, we evolve and our knowledge base improves. So kind of interesting that Lina doesn't really question what she's been taught. Lina had been to the outer border of Ember. She had stood at the edge of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness beyond the city, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned. And no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either. As far as anyone knew, the darkness did go on forever. Still, Lina wanted that other city to exist. In her imagination, it was so beautiful and it seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. So kind of interesting because it seems to us that she's describing something that could exist because we have cities like that in our world. But in her world, it just does not seem possible. But she wasn't thinking about the other city now. Today, she was happy to be right where she was. She set Papi on the couch. "Wait there," she said. She went into the kitchen where there was an electric stove and a refrigerator that no longer worked, and was used to store glasses and dishes so Papi couldn't get at them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, a wind-up clock that Granny always forgot to wind, and a long row of cans. Lina tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she could find what she wanted quickly, but Granny always messed them up. Now, she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled baby drink and a jar of boiled carrots, opened them, poured the liquid into a cup and the carrots into a little dish, and took these back to the baby on the couch. Papi dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of her carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For the moment, Lina felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow, she'd be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off Papi's chin. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be all right." The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lina arrived the next morning, she was greeted by Messenger Captain Alice Fleary, a bony woman with pale eyes and hair the color of dust. "Our new girl," said Captain Fleary to the other messengers, a cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lina. "I have your jacket right here," said the captain. She handed Lina a red jacket like the one all messengers wore. It was only a little too large. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came a deep reverberating bong. 8 o'clock, cried Captain Fleary. She waved a long arm. "Take your stations." As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lina. "Your station," she said, "is Garn Square." Lina nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by the collar. "I haven't told you the rules," she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. When a customer gives you a message, repeat it back to make sure you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you have to take it. Lina nodded. "I always go fast," she said. 4. The captain went on. "Deliver a message only to the person it's meant for. No one else." Lina nodded again. She bounced a little on her toes, eager to get going. Captain Fleury smiled. "Go," she said, and Lina was off. She felt strong and speedy and sure-footed. Ooh, look at that. Strong, speedy, sure-footed. We've got a nice alliteration there. She glanced at her reflection as she ran past the window of a furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long, dark hair flying out behind her, her long legs in their black socks, and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which had never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she was so happy. As soon as she came into Garn Square, a voice cried, "Messenger!" Her first customer. It was old Natty Prine, calling to her from the bench where he always sat. "This goes to Ravnet Parsons, 18 Selverton Square," he said. "Bend down." She bent down so that her ear was close to his whiskery mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, "My stove is broke. Don't come for dinner. Repeat." Lina repeated the message. "Good," said Natty Prine. He gave Lina 20 cents and she ran across the city to Selverton Square, where she found Ravnet Parsons also sitting on a bench. She recited the message to him. "Old turnip head," he growled. "Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't like cooking." No reply. Lina ran back to Garn Square, passing a group of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. It seemed to Lina that there were more believers these days. What they believed in, she didn't know, but it must make them happy. They were always smiling. Her next customer turned out to be Mrs. Pollster, the teacher of the 4th-year class. In Mrs. Pollster's class, they memorized passages from the book of the City of Ember every week. Mrs. Pollster had charts on the walls for everything, with everyone's name listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. "What you need to learn, children," she always said in her resonant, precise voice, "is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference," here she would stop and point to the class, and the class would finish the sentence, "you must always choose the right." In every situation, Mrs. Pollster knew what the right choice was. Now, here was Mrs. Pollster again, looming over Lina and pronouncing her message. "To Anisette Lafronde, 39 Hum Street, as follows," she said. "My confidence in you has been seriously diminished since I heard about the disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last. Please repeat." So we have some good vocabulary words in that little message there. Diminished, disreputable, interesting word choices. And because this woman does speak in such a precise way, she wants the message delivered perfectly, and Lina's going to struggle a little bit with that. It took Lina 3 tries to get this right. "Uh-oh, a red dot for me," she said. Mrs. Pollster did not seem to find this amusing. Lina had 19 customers that first morning. Some of them had ordinary messages. "I can't come on Tuesday. Buy a pound of potatoes on your way home. Please come and fix my front door." Others had messages that made no sense to her at all, like Mrs. Pollster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was not the messages, but the places she got to go. She could go into the houses of people she didn't know. and hidden alleyways and little rooms in the back of stores. In just a few hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Mrs. Sample, the mender, had to sleep on her couch because her entire bedroom, almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Felinia Tower had the skeleton of a person hanging against her living room wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. "I study it," she said when she saw Lina staring. "I have to know how people are put together." At a house on Caluce Street, Lina delivered a message to a worried-looking man whose living room was completely dark. "I'm saving on light bulbs," the man said. And when Lina took a message to the Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days the back room was used as a meeting place for people who like to converse about great subjects. "Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time?" she heard someone ask. "Perhaps," answered someone else. There was a long silence. And then again, "Perhaps not." All of it was interesting. She loved finding things out, and she loved running. And even by the end of the day, she wasn't tired. Running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them the good news they so desperately wanted to hear. So in your character chart, definitely worth adding that she loved finding things out. She loved running. That running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran to and the people whose messages she delivered. So really perfect fit in terms of a job. And if she'd gone with what she'd been assigned at random, she would have been miserable. And she never would have known this level of satisfaction, right? So that's why, in their society, this system of drawing jobs at random really doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Late in the afternoon, a young man came up to her walking with a sort of sideways lurch. He was an odd-looking person. He had a very long neck with a bump in the middle and teeth so big they looked as if they were trying to escape from his mouth. Oof, that's personification. And really gross, but there you have it. His black, bushy hair stuck out from his head in untidy tufts. "I have a message for the mayor at the gathering hall," he said. He paused to let the importance of this be understood. "The mayor," he said. "Did you get that?" "I got it," said Lina. "All right, listen carefully. Tell him. Delivery at 8 from Looper." Repeat back. "Delivery at 8 from Looper," Lina repeated. It was an easy message. "All right, no answer required." He handed her 20 cents and she sprinted away. The gathering hall occupied one entire side of Harkin Square, which was the city's central plaza. The square was paved with stone. It had a few benches bolted to the ground here and there, as well as a couple of kiosks for notices. Wide steps led up to the gathering hall, and fat columns framed its big door. The mayor's office was in the gathering hall. So were the office of clerks, who kept track of which buildings had broken windows, what street lamps needed repair, and the number of people in the city. There was the office of the timekeeper, who was in charge of the town clock. And there were offices for the guards who enforced the laws of Ember, and now and then putting pickpockets or people who got into fights into the prison room, a small one-story structure with a sloping roof that jutted out from one side of the building. Lina ran up the steps and through the door into a broad hallway. On the left was a desk, and at the desk sat a guard. Barton Snow, assistant guard, said a badge on his chest. He was a big man with wide shoulders, brawny arms, and a thick neck. But his head looked as if it didn't belong to his body. It was small and round and topped with a fuzz of extremely short hair. His lower jaw jutted out and moved a little from side to side as if he were chewing on something. When he saw Lina, his jaw stopped moving for a moment and his lips curled upward in a very small smile. "Good day," he said. "What business brings you here today?" "I have a message for the mayor." "Very good, very good." Barton Snow heaved himself to his feet. "Step this way." He led Lina down the corridor and opened a door marked reception room. Wait here, please. The mayor is in his basement office on private business, but he will be up shortly. Lina went inside. I'll notify the mayor, said Barton Snow. Please have a seat. The mayor will be right with you, or pretty soon. He left, closing the door behind him. A second later, the door opened again, and the guard's small fuzzy head reappeared. What is the message? He asked. I have to give it to the mayor in person, said Lina. Of course, said the guard. The door closed again. He doesn't seem very sure about things, Lina thought. Maybe he's new at this job. The reception room was shabby, but Lina could tell that it had once been impressive. The walls were dark red with brownish patches where the paint was peeling away. In the right-hand wall was a closed door. An ugly brown carpet lay on the floor, and on it stood a large armchair covered in itchy-looking red material, and several smaller chairs. A small table held a teapot and some cups, and a larger table in the middle of the room displayed a copy of the Book of the City of Ember, lying open as if someone were going to read from it. Portraits of all the mayors of the city since the beginning of time hung on the walls, staring solemnly from behind pieces of old window glass. Lina sat in the big armchair and waited. No one came. She got up and wandered around the room. She bent over the Book of the City of Ember and read a few sentences. The citizens of Ember may not have luxuries, but the foresight of the builders who filled the storerooms at the beginning of time has ensured that they will always have enough, and enough is all that a person of wisdom needs. She flipped a few pages. The gathering hall clock, she read, measures the hours of night and day. It must never be allowed to run down. Without it, how would we know when to go to work and when to go to school? How would the light director know when to turn the lights on and when to turn them off again? It is the job of the timekeeper to wind the clock every week and to place the date sign in Harkin Square every day. The timekeeper must perform these duties faithfully. Lina knew that not all timekeepers were as faithful as they should be. She'd heard of one some years ago who often forgot to change the date sign so that it might say Wednesday, week 38, year 227 for several days in a row. There had even been timekeepers who forgot to wind the clock so that it might stand at noon or midnight for hours at a time, causing a very long day or a very long night. The result was that no one really knew anymore exactly what day of the week it was, or exactly how many years it had been since the building of the city. They called this year 241, but it might have been 245 or 239 or 250. As long as the clock's deep boom rang out every hour and the lights went on or off more or less regularly, it didn't seem to matter. So this is kind of interesting because I want you to think back to the instructions chapter. We know that this place was only designed to last 200 to 220 years. So in the beginning, we talked about the idea that it's year 241, which is well past the expiration date for this city. But according to what Lina's telling us, it could even be the year 250. We don't know because the jobs that are being done in Ember are not being done to the best of people's ability, and that's presenting a problem for all the people of Ember. Kind of shows you how enmeshed in each other's lives they are, that they can't really run their society effectively without helping each other and pulling together. And if one person does the job poorly, it impacts everyone. Lina left the book and examined the pictures of the mayors. The seventh mayor, Pod Morwarth, was her she didn't know how many greats, grandfather. Now, I'm highlighting this because I want you to remember back to the instruction section. The seventh mayor, if you recall, is the one who took the box of instructions out of the gathering hall. So, reader, where is the box of instructions? Remember what Lina said about her house? There it is. So, we know that Lina's related to this mayor. Perhaps Her belongings include this box of instructions on how to get out of the city. Now, the part that's kind of troubling for us about that is Lina doesn't really like to think about the big issues, right? She enjoys living her life, being a messenger. She doesn't really want to think about the fate of the city. So even if this box does exist in her home, will she ever even find it? He looked quite dreary, Lina thought. His cheeks were long and hollow. His mouth turned down at the corners, and there was a lost look in his eyes. The picture she liked best was the fourth mayor, Jane Larkett, who had a serene smile and fuzzy black hair. Still, no one came. She heard no sounds from the hallway. Maybe they'd forgotten her. Lina went over to the closed door in the right-hand wall. She pulled it open and saw stairs going up. Maybe while she waited, she'd just see where they went. She started upward. At the top of the first flight was a closed door. Carefully, she opened it. She saw another hallway and more closed doors. She shut the door and kept going. Her footsteps sounded louder on the wood, and she was afraid someone would hear her and come and scold her. No doubt she was not supposed to be here, but no one came, and she climbed on, passing another closed door. The gathering hall was the only building in Ember with 3 stories. She had always wanted to stand on its roof and look out at the city. Maybe from there it would be possible to see beyond the city, into the unknown regions. If the bright city of her drawings really did exist, it would be out there somewhere. At the top of the stairs, she came to the door marked roof, and she pushed it open. Chilly air brushed against her skin. She was outside. Ahead of her was a flat gravel surface, and about 10 paces away, she could see the high wall of the clock tower. She went to the edge of the roof. From there, she could see the whole of Ember. Directly below was Harkin Square, where people were moving this way and that, all of them appearing, from this top-down view, more round than tall. Beyond Harkin Square, the lighted windows of the buildings made checkered lines, yellow and black, row after row, in all directions. She tried to see farther, across the unknown regions, but she couldn't. At the edges of the city, the lights were so far away that they made a kind of haze. She could see nothing beyond them but blackness. So this shows us that in her heart of hearts, she is curious. And that would definitely be worth adding to the character chart. She's got a curiosity. She wants to know more about what's in the unknown regions. And she wants to know if that city she's imagined for so many years is real. She heard a shout from the square below. "Look!" came a small but piercing voice. "Someone on the roof!" She saw a few people stop and look up. "Who is it? What's she doing up there?" someone cried. More people gathered until a crowd was standing on the steps of the gathering hall. "They see me," Lina thought, and it made her laugh. She waved to the crowd and did a few dance steps from the Bugfoot Scurry dance, which she had learned on Clothing Square Dance Day. And they laughed and shouted some more. Then the door behind her burst open, and a huge guard with a bushy black beard was suddenly running toward her. "Halt!" he shouted, though she wasn't going anywhere. He grabbed her by the arm. "What are you doing here?" "I was just curious," said Lina, in her most innocent voice. "I wanted to see the city from the roof." She read the guard's name badge. It said Reg Stabmark, Chief Guard. "Curiosity leads to trouble," said Reg Stabmark. He peered down at the crowd. "You've caused a commotion." He pulled her toward the door and hustled her down all 3 flights of stairs. When they came out into the waiting room, Barton Snow was standing there looking flustered, his jaw twitching from side to side. Next to him was the mayor. "Child causing trouble, Mayor Cole," said the chief guard. The mayor glared at her. "I recall your face from assignment day. Shame. Disgracing yourself in your new job." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," said Lina. "I was looking for you so I could deliver a message." "Shall we put her in the prison room for a day or 2? asked the chief guard. The mayor frowned. He pondered a moment. "What is the message?" he said. He bent down so that Lina could speak into his ear. She noticed that he smelled a little like overcooked turnips. "Delivery at 8, Lina whispered, "from Looper." The mayor smiled a tight little smile. He turned to the guard. Just a child's antics, he said. We will let it go this time. From now on, he said to Lina, behave yourself. Yes, Mr. Mayor, said Lina. And you, said the mayor, turning to his assistant guard and shaking a thick finger at him. Watch visitors much more carefully. Barton Snow blinked and nodded. Lina ran for the door. Outside, the small crowd was still standing by the steps. A few of them cheered as Lina came out. Others frowned at her and muttered words like mischief and silliness and show-off. Lina felt embarrassed suddenly. She hadn't meant to show off. She hurried past out into Otterwell Street and started to run. She didn't see Dune, who was among those watching her. He had been on his way home from his first day in the pipeworks when he came across the cluster of people gazing up at the roof of the gathering hall and laughing. He was tired and chilly. The bottoms of his pants legs were wet, and mud clung to his shoes and smeared his hands. When he raised his eyes and saw the small figure next to the clock tower, he realized right away that it was Lina. He saw her raise her arm and wave and hop about. And for a second, he wondered what it would be like up there, looking out over the whole city, laughing and waving. When Lina came down, he wanted to speak to her, but he knew he was filthy looking and that she would ask him questions he didn't want to answer. So he turned away. Walking fast, he headed home. So Dune seems to have had the exact opposite type of day. No adventure, no joy, no happiness. And that seriousness that we saw in him as a fourth grader is still there because he does seem to wonder what it's like to be lighthearted, to be laughing, to be upbeat, which is kind of sad. Dune's a very serious person, right? Okay, so I'm actually going to stop recording here and I'm going to give you chapter 3 in our next file because I want you to be able to pause. It's a long listening this week and I want you to be able to go grab a snack and move around and get your blood flowing. But do me a favor, don't skip. We got to hear every chapter to know what the heck is going on. And we've got some mysteries to uncover, including where is this place? When is this place? And does this glass city that Lina's imagining really exist? So with that in mind, grab a snack and come on back. I'll see you in file 3.